A grocery store owner writes this, quote, "Yes, I voted for the cooperatists, but like most people, it was out of frustration. We were in a depression. I had everything I could do just to keep my head above water, but I was failing. I wasn't making any money. Nobody really was, and nobody had any. And even if they did, it was relatively worthless anyway. The whole economic collapse happened so quickly. Everyone was caught off guard. Things were bad, very bad. I was in a constant fear of people looting. I was a successful business owner who had worked hard to build my business, but the way things were going, I didn't see much of a future. All the small businesses were getting crushed. You really have to understand this in order to understand the transition period. People were desperate. It wasn't like I just decided to give up my business and turn it over to the cooperatist cause. To think that is a total misrepresentation of the circumstances. And yet, this is what many people in the outside world believed. They were looking at it from the point of view that it was a solvent business, but it wasn't. There weren't any solvent businesses anymore. So now I had a chance to be a hero, and it seemed it was the only way I was going to hang on to the store. I agreed to be a food distribution center. My hope was that my suppliers would also come on board, and through my store, we could start distributing free food. That way, I could retain some control, and my family would not go hungry. We got help and recommendations from the new government. They were actively implementing ways to keep products and services moving. I had to keep track of what was needed and maintain some sort of organized, even distribution. I explained the situation to my employees, that I was going to join the cause, and we would be working voluntarily. I had a good group of employees, a lot of young people. I told them I could really use their help to keep this operation running smoothly, and hopefully, no matter how all of this turned out, maybe we could do some good for the community. Most of them stayed on. Really, what else were they going to do? It's not like they could go find another job somewhere that could pay them anything. End quote. A power company worker tells us this, quote, "The country's utilities hadn't had a chance to convert to Cohen Martin's renewable energy infrastructure, so we were all still doing power the old way. But people were not able to afford their electric bills anymore. It was crazy. As customer after customer began to default on their payments, the company went deeper and deeper into the red. It began laying off a lot of workers. Things couldn't get much worse. We'd all heard the Prime Minister's speech, and we all knew the plan. What we didn't know was if everyone would follow suit and do their part. That was the question. Electricity was essential. Everyone needed it. It was obvious that somehow the utilities needed to keep functioning. All of us workers discussed it amongst ourselves. Most of us agreed that we would stay on and work without pay. We all realized that to avoid a complete collapse of society, we needed to step up and do our part. It basically came down to this. We're working to provide what others need so that they'll work to provide what we need." End quote. A steel refinery worker tells us his experience. Quote, "I was in middle management in the steel refinery. When the Depression hit, many of our international customers went out of business. Those that remained decreased their orders. It was a nightmare. The company began laying off workers and management in waves. Following the election, when it was clear the direction the country was heading in, the company pulled out, moving as many of its assets as it could to a foreign location. It was obvious that the owners and upper management were not on board with the new administration's cooperativist agenda. Then one day, they just closed the doors and abandoned the site, leaving all the former employees out in the cold. After the Prime Minister's speech, a bunch of us got together and went about contacting all the other former employees and took it upon ourselves to attempt to reopen the facility. We were going to go back doing what we were able to do. The workers were all looking to us, their former managers, and we told them that our lives were really no better off than theirs. We were having difficulty making ends meet and providing for our families just like them. There was clearly no quick fix for the economy. It would take years, maybe even decades, to completely recover. We were also frustrated, like them, on a daily basis with many of the aspects of our financial lives, even before the Depression occurred. We told them we were committed to trying to make this new system work. Like them, we had very little, if anything, to lose, and possibly a great deal to gain. So we told them that it was our plan, with their help, to bring this facility back to life, and we hoped that the managers and employees in other industries whose products and services we need would do the same." End quote. This event made national and international news. It encouraged other employees in other industries of factories and plants that had closed to reopen and start production again. The news medias, like other businesses, were also affected by the Depression, and many went out of business. Much of the news was now available through online national bulletin boards where people with stories like the steel refinery one just mentioned were reporting their experiences. This open website was maintained by the new communications segment and was available to the general public to keep people informed. Another middle corporate manager recalls, quote, "A rash of worker mutinies broke out in companies that had not closed their doors but refused participation in the transition. There were so many so suddenly that law enforcement was powerless to do anything about it, even if they wanted to, which, in many cases, they didn't. They were as hopeful as everyone else that companies and employees would continue to produce. Many owners and upper management either fled the country or accepted the inevitable and begrudgingly acquiesced, agreeing to let their company play its role in this new scheme of things." End quote. A middle-class worker in these times tells us this, quote, "After the Prime Minister's speech, anyone who was still attempting to charge for their services was boycotted and quickly went out of business. In the beginning, many businesses refused to join the cause, and employees were often caught in a quandary. Do I listen to my boss, or do I support the efforts of my government? Many times it was the local community, not so much the employees, who would demand that the company comply. There would be a community takeover, and that, of course, made other company owners think twice about refusing to budge on the national changes taking place. Once it began, it was like dominoes." End quote. We learned this from a former waitress, quote, "Those of us in defunct industries found others that were in need of help and volunteered our services. We were welcomed and trained in various skills needed to help out. The atmosphere was one of mutual assistance. Everyone was grateful for everyone else's help. Those with more experience and know-how trained and helped those who were new." End quote. Those in prisons who had been convicted of white-collar crimes were released. White-collar crime was a term in use at the time referring to financially motivated, nonviolent crime committed for illegal monetary gain. And with the elimination of money, Belgium, as expected, saw a huge reduction in its crime rate. The creation of a national workforce database was top priority. Skilled computer technicians and programmers were tasked with the project. Workforce categories, or segments as they came to be known, were established. They combined and consolidated all of the formerly independent companies making up these industries into a more cohesive whole to support the needs of the nation. Local committees were soliciting volunteers for immediate local assistance in various crucial areas such as food distribution, transportation, housing, water and sewer, and electric power services. The public was asked to fill out online profiles in terms of their work experience and skills, as well as their areas of interest, whether or not they matched their current skills. This all became part of the new National Workforce Database, or NWD. It eventually became fully integrated with the branches extending to the various subdivided regions around the country. These smaller databases were referred to as regional workforce databases, or RWDs. One of the new administration's top facilitators recalls this, quote, "Specific workforce segments were being defined and empowered. These included a building and construction segment for repairing and upgrading all housing and industrial construction projects, a transportation segment for infrastructure projects, mass transportation creation and maintenance, as well as the individual vehicle production and distribution, and an agricultural and food distribution segment. The import-export problem was also an immediate priority. It was very apparent that Belgium would need a way to acquire non-domestic products and resources. The refining of the resources would be taken care of by the workforce, but attaining them would require capital. To offset their dependence on foreign trade, Belgium began primarily using materials that could be easily and effectively recycled, and researched ways to expand and make more efficient the recycling programs already in place. The population as a whole became very mindful of conservation and recycling practices, finding ways to make things last longer. Belgium instituted ways to use capitalism internationally. The administration determined what Belgium's most advantageous export prospects were. The production of these exportable products was built into the workforce's function. The country was able to continue providing many of its former exportable products and add new ones to the list. Having none of the usual costs, such as labor, power, maintenance, or construction, Cooperativist Belgium had a huge financial advantage over international competition." End quote. The administration formed the international financing segment of the workforce, made up of former financial professionals from the old system. This new segment was charged with setting up an international currency fund established through Swiss banking institutions, creating an international debit account. Foreign buyers would make payments to this account directly, and Belgium would debit directly into the accounts of foreign suppliers. All currency conversions were calculated and handled by the Swiss for a fee. A textile worker tells us this, quote, "Everyone had to work together. People needed each other doing their part. There was inevitable personality conflicts, but resolutions were generally arrived at by peer group discussions. If someone felt they couldn't get past certain issues, they were always free to move to another unit or department, or leave altogether without consequences. In this new atmosphere, people had an understanding that what everyone did mattered." End quote. A food distribution center worker recalls, quote, "There was a pre-ordering system in place for groceries, reducing overproduction and waste. Non-efficient products were eliminated, such as throwaway napkins and paper plates. Everything was designed to be permanent and reusable or recyclable. There were no more elaborate packaging designs. Bulk distribution of commodities was implemented wherever possible. Everyone came to the distribution centers with reusable containers for transporting groceries back to their homes. This was true for any product for which it was practical. Conservation was in everyone's best interest." End quote. A former assembly line worker remembers this, quote, "People no longer had to worry about unemployment and reductions in the workforce. In fact, any reduction in the workforce was hailed as progress, not a disaster. The less manpower needed, the better. Workers were always discovering and inventing new techniques, procedures, and equipment to enhance efficiency, quality, and reduce labor." End quote.